When you see fresh dirt being thrown on top of such a small body, something inside you dies too. And nobody ever prepares you for that kind of pain. Good morning, my dear viewers. This is Grandma Betty, 78 years young, speaking to you from my little living room in Portland, Oregon. The air conditioning is running because this summer heat is relentless, but thank God today I have a safe roof over my head. I can hardly believe I can say that after everything I've been through. Today, I'm going to share with you a story that I've kept locked inside my heart for more than 50 years. A story of love that turned into a nightmare, of shattered dreams, and of a pain that no mother should ever know. Before I begin this difficult journey, I'd like to ask a small favor from my heart. Subscribe here to Grandparents' Tales. Hit that like button, it costs nothing, and tell me in the comments which corner of America you're watching from. This helps me continue sharing my stories, and maybe alert other people who might be going through what I went through. Life isn't easy, but together we're stronger, aren't we? I was born in 1946, in a simple house in Detroit, when the city wasn't yet the troubled place it would later become. My father worked in an auto factory, an honest man who left home before sunrise and returned after dark. My mother was a seamstress and taught me the art of needle and thread from a young age. "Betty," she always said, "with a needle in your hand, you'll never go hungry." And she was right. It was this skill that provided my livelihood for many years. We were 5 siblings, all squeezed into that 2-bedroom house. We didn't have much, but there was never a shortage of food on the table or love. My parents, God rest their souls, were strict but fair. The only wealth they could give us was education, and they insisted that all of us study at least through high school, which was significant for that time. I was a dreamy girl, you know. I spent hours looking at fashion magazines that my mother brought home from her wealthier clients, imagining that one day I would have pretty dresses like those. In school, I was dedicated, especially in English and art. I loved writing short stories and dreamed of becoming a teacher. I thought the teachers with their notebooks and books were so elegant and respected by everyone. At 17, I got my first job at a clothing store downtown. It wasn't much. I arranged the racks, helped customers, made small alterations to garments. But to me, it represented independence. I could help at home and still save a little for my dreams. I continued studying at night, determined to get my teaching degree. It was during this time, working at the store, that I met Jack. Oh my God, he was so handsome. Tall, dark-haired, with those green eyes that seemed to see right through you. He worked at a shoe store across the street and always came to buy cigarettes at the newsstand in front of our store. One day, he caught me looking at him and smiled. It was a smile that brightened the entire day. "Good afternoon, miss. Your dress matches your eyes," he said the first time he worked up the courage to speak to me. I was so flustered I could barely thank him. He was 23, 6 years older than me, and had a confidence that fascinated me. He spoke as if the whole world was at his feet. At first it was just that. Smiles exchanged through the store window, quick greetings when we crossed paths on the street. Then came the little notes he left at the newsstand for the vendor to give to me. Small poems, shy declarations, invitations for coffee that I initially refused out of shyness and concern for what my mother would say. "A proper young lady doesn't go out alone with a man she barely knows," she always warned. And I respected that. I'd been raised that way. But Jack was persistent. One day, he appeared in the store as a customer. He wanted to buy a tie for his father, he said. He spent almost an hour there, trying on ties, making me laugh with his stories. When my boss wasn't looking, he invited me for that coffee again. Just a quick coffee, at the diner on the corner. Public place, full of people. "Your reputation will remain intact, I promise." I finally gave in. That first coffee turned into many others. Soon we were meeting regularly after work, sometimes just to walk downtown before each of us headed home. He was charming, spoke beautifully, had grand plans. "I'm going to open my own store one day, you'll see. I won't be a salesman my whole life. I have vision for business." My parents were suspicious at first. Dad especially thought Jack was too polished, that he talked like someone selling snake oil. But over time, he won their trust too. He showed up at our house with small gifts, a cake for Mom, a special package of coffee for Dad, candy for my younger siblings. Educated young man, my father finally admitted after a few months. At least he seems to have a future. We dated for 2 years. They were the happiest years of my life until then. Jack treated me like a princess. I remember one birthday when he saved for months to take me to a fancy restaurant downtown, one of those with cloth napkins and bow-tied waiters. I felt like I was on cloud 9. For a simple girl from Detroit, that was pure luxury. I continued studying, and he supported me. "I want an intelligent wife," he would say. "Not someone who only knows how to cook." That charmed me. It was so different from other young men I knew, who only wanted girls to take care of the house and have children. At the end of 1965, he proposed. It was on a Sunday after church. We were sitting on a park bench eating ice cream when he pulled a small box from his pocket. The ring was simple, a small stone, but to me, it was worth more than any diamond. "I want you to be my wife, Betty. I want to build a life with you." We got married 6 months later, in a simple ceremony at the neighborhood church. Me in my white dress made by my mother, him in a new navy blue suit. We didn't have money for a big celebration, just a lunch at my parents' house for immediate family. But we were happy, full of dreams. We moved into a small rented room near my parents' house. It was small but neat. I took care in decorating it, made colorful curtains, embroidered pillows. I wanted our little corner to be cozy, a real home. Jack continued working at the shoe store, now as a manager. I had managed to complete my teaching degree and was teaching children at a neighborhood school. I didn't earn much, but it helped with expenses, and I felt fulfilled. I always loved children, and being able to teach was an immense joy. The first months of marriage were like a dream. Jack would come home from work, hug me tight, ask how my day had been. Sometimes he brought a little flower, a chocolate, small surprises to please me. On weekends, we would go to the movies or simply walk around the city, making plans, imagining the future. "We'll have 3 children," he would say. 2 boys and a girl, in that order. And we would laugh, as if we could really choose. But it was after the 6th month that things began to change, in such a subtle way that, at the time, I didn't really notice. It was like that story of the frog in water that gradually heats up. When it realizes the water is boiling, it's too late to jump out. The first time I noticed something different was when I came home 20 minutes late from school. I had been talking with a student's mother who was having difficulties. When I entered, Jack was already there, sitting in our small living room with a stern face. "Where were you?" he asked, without the usual kiss. "At school, talking with a student's mother." "Why?" "School ends at 5. It's 5:20. "Yes, but Mrs. Johnson wanted to talk about little Bobby. He's having trouble with math and—" "Next time, let me know." I was worried. At the time, that even seemed sweet. He was concerned about me. He was caring. I didn't realize it was the first sign of the control that would come later. Soon came the money issue. Jack decided we should have a joint account where all our money would be deposited. "We're a couple now, Betty. What's mine is yours, and what's yours is mine." I agreed, of course. It made sense. We were a family. I just didn't notice that, little by little, he began to question every cent I spent. "Did you really need to buy that fabric? Isn't that lipstick too expensive? Why did you spend so much at the grocery store this week?" There was always an explanation that seemed reasonable. We were saving to buy our own house. We wanted to give a better life to the children who would come. It was financial prudence, not control. Or so I thought. Then came the suggestions about my clothes. "Isn't that dress a bit too low cut for a teacher? That skirt shows your figure too much. The students' parents might get the wrong idea." Always with that tone of concern, of someone who only wants what's best for me. And I, fool that I was, thought that was normal. I even found it nice that he cared so much about my reputation, about our image as a couple. I didn't realize that, slowly, he was molding me, diminishing me, turning me into a shadow of who I was. Visits to my family also began to become rarer. There was always a reason. Jack was tired. He had to work the next day. My father had made a comment that offended him. My mother was interfering too much in our lives. Gradually, the interval between visits increased. From every week to every 2 weeks, then to once a month, then only on special occasions. We're our own family now, Betty. We need to build our own traditions, our own moments. When we completed a year of marriage, we were already living in another neighborhood, farther away. Jack had gotten a promotion at a bigger store on the other side of the city. The rent was more expensive, but the apartment was better. The justification for the move was irrefutable. It was closer to his work, we would save on transportation. The fact that it was a 2-hour trip to the little school where I taught and almost 3 hours to my parents' house was a small inconvenience that I should accept for the good of our family. That's when he started suggesting that maybe I should stop working. "You arrive so tired every day, Betty, and look at how much you spend on transportation. There's almost nothing left of your salary." I resisted this idea. I loved teaching, loved my students. It was more than a job. It was a calling, but the pressure kept increasing. Jack now called the school several times a day to check if I was okay. The other teachers began to look at me strangely. The principal called me in for a talk. "Betty, your husband seems very attentive. Is everything okay at home?" I blushed with embarrassment. "Of course, Mrs. Wilson. He just worries a lot. You know how it is." She didn't seem convinced, but she didn't insist. In those days, marital problems were private matters. Nobody interfered. It was during this period that I got pregnant for the first time. The joy was immense. We would finally have our first child. Jack seemed radiant. He went back to being that caring man from the beginning, pampering me, concerned about my well-being. "Now you'll definitely have to leave that job," he said, but in such a loving way that it didn't seem like an order. "Our baby needs a rested, well-fed mother. And after the birth, the baby will need you full-time." And so, when I completed 3 months of pregnancy, I resigned from the little school. It was one of the saddest days of my life. My students made farewell cards. The principal hugged me tight and whispered, "The doors will always be open for you, Betty. Don't forget that." The following months were peaceful. Jack really made an effort to make me happy. He brought fresh fruits that I craved, massaged my swollen feet at night, talked to the growing belly. For a time, I thought I had gotten back the man I fell in love with. We began preparing the baby's room. Jack worked overtime to buy the crib, the layette. I sewed little clothes, embroidered cloths, made booties. We were happy, truly happy. Or at least I was. In the 7th month of pregnancy, I received the news that my father had suffered a stroke. He was in the hospital, in serious condition. When I told Jack, I expected him to drop everything and take me to see my father immediately. Instead, he frowned. "It's not good for you to get agitated in your condition, Betty. Think of the baby. Let's wait for better news before visiting." "But Jack, it's my father. It might be the last time I see him alive." "Exactly why. The emotion could harm you, cause a premature birth. It's too risky." I tried to argue, to plead, but he was adamant. He wouldn't take me to the hospital and wouldn't let me go alone. For the baby's sake. I spent the entire night crying, praying that my father would hold on until I could see him. 3 days later, we received the news. My father had passed away without me being able to say goodbye. It was the first time I hated Jack, that I felt a deep and bitter anger, but I was so dependent on him, financially, emotionally, that I swallowed this feeling. After all, he was only taking care of me and the baby, right? At least that's what I kept telling myself. At the funeral, which Jack finally allowed me to attend, my mother noticed something. "Betty, that bruise on your arm. What happened?" I quickly pulled down the sleeve of my dress to cover it. "Nothing, Mom. I bumped into the kitchen cabinet." I didn't tell her about the argument the night before, when Jack held my arm forcefully to prevent me from going out alone to buy flowers for the wake. I didn't tell her about how he had started using physical force to calm me down when I got too emotional. Because at that moment, with a baby about to be born and a father freshly buried, the last thing I wanted was to admit that I had made a terrible mistake in marrying Jack, that charming man had transformed into a controlling monster, that I was trapped in a gilded cage that got smaller every day. But the worst was yet to come, and nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what would happen after our son was born. Our son Michael was born on a hot January night in 1967. It was almost 20 hours of labor, alone in that cold room at the public hospital. In those days, husbands couldn't accompany the birth. They waited in the waiting room, smoking and pacing back and forth. When I finally heard the strong cry of my boy, it was as if the whole world had stopped. I'll never forget when the nurse placed that little red crying bundle in my arms. So small, so perfect, with his father's green eyes and my upturned nose. Jack came in to see us almost an hour later. He seemed emotional, with teary eyes as he held his son for the first time. "My boy, my little man," he whispered, gently rocking Michael. At that moment, I thought everything would change, that the birth of our son would bring back the Jack I fell in love with. For a few weeks, it was exactly like that. Jack would come home from work, eager to hold the baby, give him a bath, change diapers. He took photos with that Kodak camera he had bought, especially to record every moment of our son. He even helped me in the middle of the night when Michael woke up crying. He would warm the bottle while I, exhausted, tried to calm our little one. "You're turning out to be a great mother, Betty," he would say, filling me with pride. I bent over backwards to take care of the baby and keep the house immaculate, even though I was only sleeping 2 or 3 hours a night. I wanted Jack to come home and find everything perfect, dinner ready, the baby clean and smiling, me dressed up waiting at the door like in those American magazines I used to flip through at the hairdressers. But gradually, fatigue accumulated. Michael had terrible colic that made him cry for hours on end. I walked around the house in the middle of the night, singing, rocking, trying to calm him while Jack slept. "I need to rest for work tomorrow," was the excuse. "You can sleep during the day when he sleeps," except Michael rarely slept more than 40 minutes at a stretch. When he finally fell asleep, I rushed to wash clothes, cook, clean the house. I had no time to rest. I began to lose weight. Deep, dark circles marked my face in the mirror. My hair, once my pride, now lived in a messy bun, lifeless. It was during this time that Jack's irritation began to manifest. Little things bothered him: a stain on his shirt, dinner slightly delayed, a missing button on his jacket. His voice, once soft, gained a cutting tone that made me cringe. "What a mess this is, Betty. Didn't you have all day to clean the house?" "The baby wouldn't stop crying, Jack. I could barely shower today. Figure it out. Other women manage." I began to live in a constant state of anxiety, trying to predict what might irritate him, bending over backwards to avoid any reason for complaint. When Michael turned 3 months old, Jack complained that I wasn't giving him enough attention as a husband. "You only have eyes for the boy now. What about me? I have needs too, you know." I tried to explain that I was exhausted, that I could barely stand at the end of the day, that my body was still recovering from childbirth. It didn't help. The next night, he arrived with a bouquet of roses and a new dress. "Put this on. My mother is coming to get Michael. We're going out to dinner." But he's still too young to be away from me. And breastfeeding? I already bought formula. "It'll do you good to get out of this house a bit. Dress up like a woman instead of looking like a sloppy housekeeper." Those words hurt me deeply, but I swallowed my tears. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was neglecting myself, dedicating too much to the baby and forgetting about my husband. I put on the dress, slightly tight on my milk-swollen breasts, applied lipstick, tried to look happy with that gift. Dinner was tense. I could barely focus on the conversation, worried about Michael. Jack drank much more than usual, talking loudly, making jokes with the waiter. When we got home, his mother had already left. Michael was sleeping in the crib, but woke up minutes later, crying desperately. "He must be hungry," I said, rushing to pick him up. Jack grabbed my arm forcefully. "Let him cry a bit. We need to finish our night." What happened next still pains me to remember. While my son cried in the room next door, Jack demanded his husband's rights. It was quick, painful, humiliating. When he finally let me go to the baby, Michael was purple from crying so much, his diaper soaked, refusing the formula bottle his grandmother had left. That night marked a definitive change in our marriage. Jack began to demand that I be a wife before being a mother. He criticized the time I spent with Michael, said I was spoiling the boy with so much holding, so much attention. "A man needs to learn to be strong from an early age," he would repeat when I ran to soothe the baby's cry. "You'll turn my son into a sissy if you continue like this." Michael was growing fast, already sitting up on his own, smiling when he saw me, laughing when I made silly faces for him. He was a beautiful baby, full of life. Jack seemed proud when he showed him off to friends and coworkers, but at home the story was different. He was bothered by the noise, by toys scattered around, by the attention the baby demanded. "This boy only knows how to cry. I can't stand this noise anymore." It was during one of these outbursts of anger that he hit Michael for the first time. Our son was 8 months old, learning to crawl, and knocked over the full ashtray onto the living room carpet. Jack, who was watching football on TV, jumped up and slapped the baby's little hand hard enough to leave a mark. My son's cry of pain and fright was like a knife in my chest. I ran to pick him up, but Jack pushed me away. "Let him learn. He needs to know there are consequences when he messes up. He's just a baby, Jack. He doesn't understand what he did. And he'll continue not understanding if you keep coddling him all the time." That night, when Jack finally fell asleep, I took Michael from the crib and brought him to the kitchen. Sitting at the small table, with my son nestled in my lap, I thought for the first time about leaving. Going back to my mother's house, starting over, anything to protect my son from this man I no longer recognized. But where would I go? My mother could barely support herself after my father's death. I had no savings of my own. All money went into the account controlled by Jack. I no longer had contact with friends, colleagues from the school where I had taught. I was completely isolated, dependent. I decided I needed to hang on, at least until I could come up with a plan. Maybe get a secret job while Jack was away, save some hidden money, prepare an escape. But with a small baby, it seemed impossible. The following months were of constant tension. Jack found fault with everything: the food, the cleaning, Michael's crying, my appearance. The slaps on the baby's hand became frequent for increasingly trivial disobediences: spilling food, making noise during the TV news, crying when his father tried to hold him. "He hates me. You've poisoned my son against me," Jack would shout, as if a baby less than a year old could elaborate such feelings. I began to notice that Michael really did become tense when his father came home. He would stop playing, stay very quiet in a corner, as if trying to make himself invisible. At just 1 year old, he had already learned to fear his own father. This broke my heart. One Sunday morning, when Michael had just started taking his first steps, Jack announced he had a surprise. We were going to spend the day at the zoo, like a normal family. I was excited about the idea. It had been so long since we'd gone out for something fun. I dressed Michael in his nicest outfit, prepared a bag with diapers, bottles, cookies. I even applied lipstick and put on a floral dress, trying to rekindle something of our old relationship. The outing started well. Michael was enchanted with the animals, pointing and babbling his first words, "Woof, woof," for any animal, regardless of whether it was a lion or a monkey. Jack seemed relaxed, taking photos, buying cotton candy, holding his son to see the animals better in their enclosures. He seemed like the father I had always dreamed he would be. Until, on the way back, we hit terrible traffic. The car was hot. Michael began to get irritable, crying. I tried to distract him with toys, songs, but nothing helped. Jack gripped the steering wheel tightly, his face getting redder and redder. "Shut that boy up, Betty. I can't stand this crying anymore. He's tired, hot. It's normal. It will pass." Michael cried louder, kicking in the improvised car seat. In those days, there weren't the safety seats of today. Suddenly, Jack slammed on the brakes at the shoulder with a jolt that threw us forward. "Give him here. I'll teach him to be quiet." "No, Jack, he's just a baby." But he had already turned to the back seat, pulling Michael by the arm so hard that my son screamed in pain. I tried to stop him, threw myself between them, received a slap to the face that left me dizzy. "Get out of the way, Betty. This brat needs to learn to respect his father." What followed was a nightmare. Right there on the shoulder of the interstate, with cars passing at high speed, Jack beat our son. Not just slaps on the hand or bottom, as he had done before, but slaps to the face, to the head. Michael screamed in panic, his little face red, his eyes wide with terror. I became desperate, trying to protect my son, receiving some of the blows. I screamed for help, but the noise of the cars swallowed my voice. Finally, I managed to grab Michael and curl up with him in the corner of the seat, forming a barrier with my body. "Have you lost your mind? You'll kill our son!" Jack stopped, panting, looking at his own hands as if he didn't recognize what he had just done. Michael sobbed against my chest, trembling. A trickle of blood ran from his small nostril. "He drives me crazy," Jack muttered, running his hand through his hair. "If he behaved properly, this wouldn't happen." We returned home in deadly silence. Michael eventually fell asleep, exhausted from crying so much. I looked out the window, tears silently streaming down, a decision forming in my mind. No matter how, no matter where, we had to escape. My son wouldn't survive much longer in that house. That night, after Jack fell asleep, I made a small bundle with some of our clothes and a little food. I took the money I had managed to hide over the months, a few coins here and there from grocery change, kept in a cookie tin at the back of the cupboard. It was little, very little, but it would have to do. I planned to leave the next morning as soon as Jack went to work. I would go to the bus station, take a bus to anywhere far from there, maybe to a small town where the cost of living was lower. I would find a job, a place to stay. Anything would be better than that hell. But fate had other plans for us. The next morning, Jack announced that he wouldn't be going to work. He had taken the day off to fix what happened yesterday. "We're going to be a real family from today on, Betty. No shouting, no problems. I promise." I had heard promises like that before. After each explosion of violence came the remorse, the vows of change, the small kindnesses that lasted a few days before everything went back to normal. It was a cycle I knew all too well. But that day, Jack seemed different, calmer, more centered. He played with Michael during the morning, with a patience he hadn't shown in months. He even helped me prepare lunch, talking about plans for the future like in the old days. "I'm thinking about moving us to a bigger house, with a yard for the boy to play in. What do you think?" I responded mechanically, smiling at the right moments, agreeing with everything. Inside, I was in pieces. My escape plan had been postponed, but I wouldn't give up. Not after what I had seen the day before. Not after realizing that the violence only increased, that one day it could be too late. In the afternoon, Jack announced he was going to the grocery store to buy ice cream. A treat for the little champ. As soon as he left, I ran to get the hidden bundle. It was my chance. We had little time. I was dressing Michael when I heard the front door open. Jack had returned too quickly. There was no ice cream in his hands. His gaze went directly to the bundle of clothes on the bed, to the prepared baby bag. "What is this, Betty? Were you thinking of leaving?" My blood froze. I tried to improvise an excuse. Just setting aside some old clothes to donate, and organizing Michael's bag for tomorrow. His face contorted into a grimace I knew all too well. "Liar! You were going to run away. You were going to take my son away." He advanced toward me with clenched fists. Michael, sensing the danger, began to cry desperately. I tried to run to the bathroom, lock the door, buy time, but he was faster. He grabbed my hair, pulling so hard I felt strands detach from my scalp. "Nobody is going to take my son from me, understand? Nobody." What followed was the worst beating I had ever suffered. Punches, slaps, kicks when I fell to the floor. Michael screamed in the crib, stretching his little arms toward me, calling, "Mama! Mama!" The only words he knew how to say. When Jack finally stopped, I was semi-conscious, my face swollen, tasting the metallic flavor of blood in my mouth. He grabbed Michael from the crib with brutality. "I'm going to give my son a bath, and when I get back, I want this mess cleaned up and dinner ready. Understand?" I nodded weakly, without strength to speak. I heard the bathroom door close, the water begin to run. Michael was still crying, but the sound was soon muffled. With superhuman effort, I dragged myself to the phone in the living room. My hands were shaking so much I could barely dial. I called the only number I knew by heart, besides my mother's. My former principal, Mrs. Wilson. She had said the doors would always be open for me. I desperately hoped it wasn't just a polite farewell phrase. "Hello?" The familiar voice on the other end of the line gave me a glimmer of hope. "Mrs. Wilson," my voice was just a hoarse whisper. "Help me. He's going to kill my son." I couldn't say anything more. I heard a noise coming from the bathroom that froze my soul. It wasn't crying anymore, but sounds of choking, of struggle. I dropped the phone and dragged myself down the hallway, my body protesting in pain with every movement. The scene I found in the bathroom will haunt me until the day I die. If you've been following me this far, congratulations. For being a loyal viewer here on Grandparents' Tales, we're going to give you a chance to win over $1,000. Participating is very easy, just like this video and comment with which city you were born in. I'm curious to read all your comments. When I opened that bathroom door, the world seemed to slow down. Jack was bent over the bathtub, holding Michael underwater. My son was thrashing, his little eyes wide with terror, bubbles of air escaping from his small mouth. The water, which should have been warm and welcoming, was freezing cold. I later discovered he had filled the tub with cold water to calm the noisy brat. I don't know where I found the strength. My body was broken from the blows, but something primitive, that mother's instinct that overcomes any physical pain, made me advance like a lioness. I didn't think, I just acted. I grabbed the ceramic lamp that sat on the bathroom shelf and hit Jack on the head with all the strength I could muster. He staggered backward, surprised, releasing Michael. I plunged my arms into the icy water and pulled my son up. His lips were blue, coughing and vomiting water but breathing. Alive, thank God, alive. "You crazy woman, what do you think you're doing?" Jack was recovering from the blow, blood streaming from a cut on his temple. His eyes were no longer human. They were like those of a rabid animal, bloodshot, without any trace of the man I once loved. I pressed Michael against my chest and tried to run for the door, but he was faster. He grabbed my arm forcefully, twisting until I screamed in pain. Michael cried, soaked and freezing, trembling against me. "You're not going anywhere with my son, understand? Nowhere." At that moment, I heard what seemed to be the sweetest sound in the world. Sirens approaching, and then loud knocks on the front door. "Police, open the door!" Jack's face transformed. Hatred gave way to panic. He released my arm and backed away, looking around like a cornered animal. "What did you do, Betty? Who did you call?" The knocks on the door grew stronger. "Open now, or we'll break it down." Jack seemed undecided between continuing the aggression or trying to escape. I took advantage of this moment of hesitation to run with Michael to the living room, screaming for help with what was left of my voice. The door gave way with a crash. 2 police officers entered, guns drawn. Behind them, to my surprise, was Mrs. Wilson, my former principal, her face contorted with horror at seeing me in that state. "My God in heaven, Betty, what did he do to you?" I collapsed on the floor, still holding Michael against my chest. Only then did I realize that my son was too quiet. I looked at his little face. His lips still had a bluish tint, his breathing weak and irregular. "My baby, help my baby," was all I could say before darkness enveloped me. I woke up in the hospital, my entire body aching, bandages and dressings everywhere. The first thing I did was ask about Michael. The nurse tried to calm me, saying the doctor would come talk to me, but I insisted so much that she finally gave in. "Your son is in the pediatric ICU. He's stable, but there were complications from the water he swallowed and from the time without adequate oxygen." I begged to see him. Even with the protests of the medical team, I dragged myself through the corridors until I found my baby, connected to tubes and machines that seemed to swallow him up. So small in that hospital bed, so fragile. The doctors used terms I barely understood. Aspiration pneumonia, cerebral hypoxia, critical but stable condition. I spent days by that bedside, praying like I had never prayed before. I talked to Michael all the time, told him stories, sang the songs he liked, begged him to fight, to come back to me. It was there, in that ICU with the smell of disinfectant and constant beeping of machines, that the police came to take my statement. I told everything, from the beginning of the marriage, how Jack's behavior gradually changed, the aggressions that kept getting worse, to the terrible moment in the bathroom. Each word seemed to tear a piece of my soul, but I knew I needed to speak, needed to ensure that monster never got near my son again. "He was arrested in the act," informed the officer, a middle-aged man with kind eyes that contrasted with his intimidating uniform. "With your documented injuries and the boy's condition, he should remain detained until trial." I felt momentary relief, soon replaced by the more urgent concern: my son's recovery. Michael remained in the ICU for almost 3 weeks. When he was finally transferred to a regular room, the doctors called me for a serious conversation. "Mrs. Smith, your son is out of immediate danger, but we need to talk about sequelae." That word, sequelae, fell like a stone in my stomach. The doctor, an older gentleman with gray hair and thick-rimmed glasses, chose his words carefully, but there was no gentle way to say what needed to be said. The prolonged lack of oxygenation may have caused brain damage. It's still too early to determine the exact extent, but we observed some concerning signs in reflexes and responses. I heard everything as if I were submerged, the words reaching me distorted: brain damage, compromised development, possible motor and cognitive delay, follow-up with specialists, physical therapy, speech therapy. Will he be okay again? It was the only question I could formulate. The doctor sighed, removing his glasses to clean them, a gesture that seemed more like a way to buy time to choose his next words. The infant brain has an incredible capacity for recovery and adaptation, but it would be irresponsible of me to promise a complete recovery. Your son will need special care, a lot of patience and love. At that moment, I made a silent promise to Michael and to myself. I would dedicate every second of my life to helping my son overcome this. If I needed to move mountains, I would move them. If I needed to fight against the whole world, I would fight. When we finally were discharged, we had nowhere to go. Our house was sealed off, part of the criminal investigation. Jack remained in prison, but his family, who rarely visited us before, now appeared demanding rights over Michael. My mother-in-law even insinuated that I was the one to blame for provoking her son until he lost his head. It was Mrs. Wilson who saved us again. She offered the guest room of her house until I could reorganize. "For as long as necessary, Betty. You are not alone in this." The following months were a constant battle. I accompanied Michael in endless sessions of various therapies: physical therapy to strengthen muscles that had lost tone, speech therapy to stimulate the speech that had regressed, occupational therapy to relearn basic skills. Each small progress was celebrated as a great victory. In parallel, I faced the criminal process against Jack. I had to relive every moment of that nightmare, now before judges, prosecutors, lawyers. His defense tried everything, claiming I was exaggerating, that I was an emotionally unstable mother, that the accident in the bath was my fault for leaving a baby alone with an inexperienced father. The trial dragged on for almost a year. In the end, the evidence was too irrefutable. The marks on Michael's body and mine spoke for themselves. Jack was convicted of attempted murder and assault, with a sentence that seemed insufficient given the damage he had caused, but at least it meant we would be safe for the next few years. Meanwhile, with Mrs. Wilson's help, I got a job as an assistant at the same school where I had taught. It wasn't a teaching position. My time and energy were mainly dedicated to Michael, but it allowed me to have an income, rebuild some independence. The school even adapted my hours so I could take my son to therapies. Michael had just turned 2 when I filed for divorce. In those days, in 1969, divorce was not something simple or well regarded by society. Divorced women carried a stigma, were viewed with suspicion, as if they had failed somehow. But I no longer cared what people thought. My only concern was ensuring the safety and well-being of my son. The challenges we faced were enormous. Michael had significant difficulties. He took much longer than other children to walk again. His speech was limited to few words. He had panic attacks when he saw water in bathtubs or pools. But he also had a fighting spirit that surprised me daily. His smile, that smile that lit up the green eyes inherited from his father, returned with increasing frequency. Gradually, we built a new life. I rented a small but cozy apartment, not far from the school where I worked. I transformed Michael's room into a stimulating space, with vibrant colors, educational toys, everything designed to help in his development. I learned physical therapy and speech therapy techniques to continue the exercises at home. I read tirelessly about brain injuries, child development, alternative teaching methods. When Michael turned 3, the doctors did a complete reassessment. The neurologist, a young doctor newly arrived from a specialization on the East Coast, reviewed all the exams and history. "Mrs. Smith, your son has made remarkable progress, far beyond what we initially expected. Those words were like a balm for my exhausted heart. Michael would still face challenges, would still need therapies and follow-up. But the dedication had borne fruit. He now spoke small sentences, could run, albeit with some imbalance, showed interest in books and drawings. "This is due much more to your dedication than to any medical intervention," added the doctor. What this child needed, besides the treatments, was exactly what he received: unconditional love and constant stimulation. Life took its course. It wasn't easy being a single mother of a child with special needs in America in the 1970s. The prejudice was double, for being divorced and for having a different child. But I found strength where I didn't know it existed, creating armor against curious looks, malicious comments, unsolicited opinions. Michael and I became an inseparable team. Where one went, the other followed. We learned together to face difficulties, to celebrate small achievements, to find joy in simple things. He taught me more about courage and perseverance than any adult ever could. When Jack was nearing completion of 5 years in prison, I received the news I most feared. He had gotten a sentence reduction for good behavior and would be released soon. The panic I felt was indescribable. Even with the restraining order we had obtained, even knowing he would no longer have parental rights over Michael, the fear that he would return to finish what he had started consumed me. It was during this time that I made a drastic decision. We needed to disappear. Move to another city, start over where nobody knew us, where Jack couldn't find us. I explained the situation to Mrs. Wilson, who once again proved to be an angel in our lives. "I have a sister in Seattle," she said. "She runs a private school there and is looking for teachers. I can talk to her, explain your situation." In less than a month, we had moved to the Pacific Northwest. We left behind the apartment, most of the furniture, almost everything that could connect us to our previous life. Mrs. Thompson, Wilson's sister, welcomed us with open arms. I got the job at her school, a small apartment in the Fremont neighborhood, and most importantly, a new identity for Michael and me. Betty Smith and Michael Smith ceased to exist officially. We became Laura Johnson and Peter Johnson. New documents, new background story. I was a widow. My husband had died in an accident before our son was born. Peter had complications at birth, which explained his developmental difficulties. A sad story, but common enough not to raise many questions. The years passed. Peter grew up, facing challenges, but overcoming many of them. He managed to complete his studies in regular schools with specialized support. He had learning difficulties in some areas, especially math, but excelled in arts and music. At 18, he began working at a small print shop where his talent for drawing was valued. During all this time, I lived in fear. Every knock on the door made me freeze. Every man who vaguely resembled Jack in the street made me cross to the other side, heart racing. I never became romantically involved with anyone again. The trauma was too deep. The priority was my son. And besides, I couldn't risk someone discovering our secret. I found out, through very cautious contacts with Mrs. Wilson, that Jack had indeed looked for us after being released. He was furious to discover we had disappeared, threatened people, tried to sue the school where I worked. Eventually, it seems he gave up, or at least that's what we hoped for many years. In 1990, when Peter was already 23 and had been working at the print shop for 5 years, we received a letter that would change everything again. It was from Mrs. Wilson, now an elderly lady. The letter informed, carefully to avoid mentioning names, that person had died in a car accident after driving drunk. Jack was dead. After more than 2 decades, we could finally breathe without fear. Peter noticed the change in me immediately. It was as if an invisible weight had been removed from my shoulders. When I explained the reason, he remained silent for a long time. "Do you think we should go back to using our real names?" he finally asked. The question caught me by surprise. After so much time as Laura and Peter Johnson, I didn't know if we could be Betty and Michael Smith again. Besides, Peter had no conscious memories of life before Seattle, of who we really were. "I don't know, son. I think we are already who we've pretended to be for so long." He nodded, thoughtful. "But I'd like to know our true story. All of it." It was then that I sat with my adult son and told, for the first time, all the details of our previous life. The parts I had softened, omitted, to protect him. I told about his father, about how we met, about how love turned into a nightmare. I told about that terrible day in the bathroom, about how I almost lost him, about our escape and new identity. Peter listened to everything with a calmness that surprised me. When I finished, with tears streaming down my face, he held my hands between his, man's hands, calloused from work, so different from the small hands I had once desperately protected. Thank you for saving me, Mom, for fighting for me when I couldn't fight for myself. Those simple words made all the sacrifice, all the struggle worth it. My son was alive, was a good man, kind, hard-working. We had survived, but fate still held one last surprise for us, one that even in my darkest nightmares I couldn't have imagined. We thought our life had finally found some peace after learning of Jack's death. Peter, or Michael, our real name that we only used in private conversations at home, was thriving at the print shop. At 25, he had been promoted to lead designer, creating logos and materials for local businesses. His difficulties, though still present, didn't prevent him from leading an almost normal life. I continued at Mrs. Thompson's school, now as an educational coordinator. After so many years, the lie had become our truth. We were respected in the community, the dedicated widowed teacher and her talented son who overcame learning difficulties. We even had a small apartment of our own, bought with much sacrifice in endless installments. It was on a rainy Wednesday in March 1993 that everything changed again. Peter had left work early, complaining of a severe headache, a sequela that still occasionally tormented him since the childhood incident. I was at school, finalizing the organization of a parent-teacher meeting when the secretary called me urgently. "Mrs. Johnson, there's a man who wants to speak with you. He said it's important, about your son." My heart immediately froze. Even after all those years, fear never completely abandoned me. At the school reception, I found a man of about 50, with graying hair at the temples, in a well-cut suit. I didn't recognize him immediately. "Mrs. Smith, or should I say, Mrs. Johnson?" I felt the blood drain from my face. No one in Seattle knew my real name. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm Laura Johnson." He smiled, a cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I think you do know, Betty. I'm Richard Nelson, Jack's younger brother. It took a while, but I finally found you and my nephew." At that moment, the world seemed to collapse around me. Jack's brother. I barely remembered him. He was much younger, was in the army when we got married. We rarely saw him. How had he found us after so many years? "What do you want from us? Jack is dead. We have nothing more to do with your family." "Oh, but we do," he replied, pulling an envelope from the inside pocket of his jacket. "My brother left a will. All his assets should go to his son, Michael. I've been looking for you for years, since he died." Finally, a private detective managed to track the identity change. I remained silent, calculating what to do. I needed to get home, alert Peter, maybe flee again. "I'm not here to cause problems," continued Richard, interpreting my silence as fear. "Jack was a troubled man, I always knew that. What he did to you and the boy was unforgivable. I'm here only to fulfill my legal obligation to deliver the inheritance to the rightful heir." I didn't trust him for a second. His expression was too similar to Jack's when he lied. The same calculating eyes, the same false smile. "I'll think about it. I need to go now." "Of course," he responded smoothly, handing me a card. "I'm staying at the Grand Hotel. I'll be around for a few days. I would very much like to meet my nephew." I left the school practically running, ignoring the curious looks. I needed to get home, check if Peter was okay, decide what to do. The whole bus ride, my heart beat erratically. The rain that fell seemed like a harbinger of dark times returning. When I arrived at our building, I immediately noticed something strange. The apartment door was ajar. Peter never left the door like that, especially when he had a headache. "Peter?" I called, slowly pushing the door. "Son?" The silence that answered me was disturbing. Our small apartment seemed strangely cold, as if an evil presence had passed through. In the living room, nothing seemed out of place. But when I reached the hallway leading to the bedrooms, I saw wet shoe marks on the floor. Marks that weren't mine or Peter's. "Peter!" I called louder, panic growing. "Are you there?" I opened the door to his room with my heart in my throat. Empty. The unmade bed indicated he had lain down to rest. but he was no longer there. In the kitchen and bathroom, also no sign of him. That's when I noticed something on our small balcony. The glass door was open, letting the rain in and wetting the floor. I crossed the living room with trembling steps, and what I saw on the balcony made me let out a scream that seemed to come from the depths of my soul. Peter was lying on the wet floor, blood mixed with rainwater forming a dark pool around his head. Next to him, a broken plant pot, apparently the weapon used to strike him. "No! My son! No!" I fell to my knees beside him, my hands trembling as I checked his pulse. It was still beating, weak, irregular, but beating. Thank God he was alive. The head wound was bleeding abundantly, as all scalp wounds do. I tried to stop it with a towel while frantically searching for the phone to call an ambulance. While dialing the emergency number, I heard a noise coming from the bedroom. I was not alone in the apartment. The aggressor was still there. I left the phone off the hook and grabbed the first thing that could serve as a weapon, a kitchen knife. With my heart hammering against my ribs, I prepared to face whoever it was. No one else would hurt my son while I breathed. The door to my bedroom opened slowly, and there he was. Richard Nelson. But how? I had just left him at the school. "I see you've met my son, Junior," he said with a frightening calmness. He arrived a little earlier than I would have liked. It was then that I understood. It wasn't Richard at the school, but his son, who must have been the spitting image of his father. A trap, and I had fallen right into it, leaving Peter alone and vulnerable. From the bedroom emerged another man, younger, with the same cold eyes of the Nelson family. He must have been about 30, the age Jack would have been when he died. The resemblance was disturbing. "This wasn't supposed to happen like this," said the young man, looking at Peter lying on the balcony. He reacted, tried to call the police. I had to stop him. "What do you want?" I asked, the knife firmly pointed at them, my body positioned between the intruders and my injured son. "Money? We don't have anything of value here." Richard laughed, a dry sound without humor. "No, Betty, we don't want money. We want justice. You destroyed my brother, destroyed our family. Jack lost everything, his job, his reputation, years of his life in prison. And then you ran away with his son, like a thief in the night. Your brother tried to kill our son. He was an abusive monster." "Lies!" he roared, advancing a step. "Jack was a good man whom you drove crazy with your provocations, your neuroses. He told us everything, how you manipulated him, how you used the boy against him." It was surreal to hear that distorted version of reality. I realized then that there was no way to argue with this man. He had spent decades nurturing a hatred based on the lies Jack told to justify his monstrous acts. "And what do you intend to do now? Kill us? The police are already on their way." I bluffed, indicating the phone off the hook. For a moment, I saw doubt in their eyes, but then Junior smiled, a smile identical to his father's that still populated my nightmares. "No, we're not going to kill you. It would be too quick." What followed happened with dizzying speed. Junior advanced toward me while Richard went around to get to Peter. I managed to land a blow on Junior's arm with the knife, making him back away with a cry of pain. I ran to Peter, trying to drag him inside, away from Richard. But it was an uneven fight. Richard grabbed me by the hair, pulling so hard that I felt as if my scalp would tear off. Junior, even wounded, managed to immobilize me, twisting my arm until the knife fell. "We're taking the boy," said Richard, already dragging Peter across the floor as if he were a sack of garbage. "She comes too. At the ranch, we'll decide what to do." I fought like a wild animal, biting, scratching, screaming. But Junior was too strong. A blow to my temple left me dizzy, almost unconscious. The last thing I saw before darkness enveloped me was my son being carried out of the apartment, blood still streaming from his head. When I came to, I was in a car trunk, hands and feet tied, mouth covered with duct tape. The vehicle was moving on a bumpy road, each jolt sending waves of pain through my bruised body. I tried to orient myself, understand how long I had been unconscious, where we were going. But it was impossible to know. My thoughts were with Peter. Was he alive? The head injury was serious. He needed urgent medical attention. What if he was bleeding inside the skull? What if he had another brain injury after everything he had already overcome in life? The car finally stopped after what seemed like an eternity. I heard muffled voices, doors opening and closing. Then the trunk opened, letting in the cold night air. We were in the countryside, far from any city lights. The starry sky would have been beautiful under any other circumstances. "Welcome to your new home," said Richard, roughly pulling me out of the trunk. "At least for the next few days, until we decide what to do with you." I looked around desperately, searching for Peter. I saw him being dragged from another car by Junior, still unconscious. At least he was alive. I could see his chest rising and falling with his breathing. They took us to a simple farmhouse, isolated in the middle of nowhere. From the darkness and the distant lights I could see, I imagined we were in some rural area on the outskirts of Seattle. Inside the house, we were thrown into a small, windowless room that seemed to have been prepared specifically to keep us imprisoned. An old mattress on the floor, a bucket in a corner, nothing more. The door was solid, with several locks on the outside. Richard tore the tape from my mouth with a pull that took skin with it. "Scream all you want. Nobody will hear you here." As soon as they left us alone, I dragged myself to Peter, still tied, checking his vital signs. His breathing was more regular now, but the head wound worried me too much. It had stopped bleeding, forming a thick, dark crust, but without proper treatment, the risk of infection was enormous. "Peter," I whispered, pressing my face against his. "Peter, wake up. Please, son, open your eyes." After several minutes of trying, I was rewarded with a weak moan. His eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, until he managed to recognize me. "Mom? What? Where are we?" "Shh, don't strain yourself," I replied, tears streaming down my face as I tried to explain the situation in the least frightening way possible. But there was no way to soften the truth. We were kidnapped by Jack's relatives, and our prospects weren't good. During the following hours, we worked together to try to loosen our ties. Peter, even injured and weak, managed to sit up, and we used each other's backs to try to undo the knots. It was a slow and painful process, the rope cutting into our skin, but the alternative, passively waiting for whatever they had planned for us, was not an option. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, I managed to loosen Peter's hands. With his fingers free, he quickly untied the rest of my ropes, and then I freed his feet. We were loose, but still trapped in that windowless room with a massive door locked from the outside. Peter was pale, with a feverish look. The head wound was clearly getting infected. We needed to get out of there urgently. "We need a plan," I whispered, examining every inch of the room for a possible exit or something that could serve as a weapon. The room was practically empty, but I discovered that one of the floorboards was loose. With effort, I managed to tear it out. It wasn't much, but it was a piece of wood with a relatively sharp point, better than nothing. We spent the whole night awake, alert to any sound, preparing ourselves for the first opportunity to escape. Peter was visibly getting worse, alternating between periods of lucidity and confusion. The fever was increasing, and he occasionally shivered with cold, despite the stuffy heat of the room without ventilation. "If we manage to get out of here," he murmured during a moment of clarity, "promise we won't run and hide anymore. Promise we'll face this, end this once and for all." I nodded, holding his hand hot with fever. "I promise, son. We'll never live in fear again." Dawn came, bringing with it sounds of movement throughout the house. I positioned myself next to the door, the board firm in my hands, ready to attack as soon as someone entered. Peter was sitting on the mattress, too weak to stand, but determined to help in any way he could. I heard the sound of the locks being opened. I took a deep breath, preparing myself. It was our only chance. The door opened and Junior entered carrying a tray with what appeared to be bread and water. Before he could react, I hit him with all my strength on the head. He staggered, dazed, dropping the tray. I gave him no chance to recover. I struck again and again until he fell to the floor, unconscious or worse. I didn't stop to check. "Let's go," I called Peter, helping him to stand. He leaned on me, barely able to walk. We went out into a dark corridor, hearing voices coming from what seemed to be the kitchen. Richard wasn't alone. There was at least one more person in the house. We walked as silently as possible down the corridor, looking for the exit. Peter weighed more and more against me, his legs giving way under his weight. The infection was winning rapidly. We found the back door and opened it carefully. Dawn greeted us with a rural landscape, pasture fields, a dirt road in the distance, no visible neighboring houses. We were truly isolated. "We need to run," I whispered, practically carrying Peter now. "To that woods over there. We can hide and then make our way to the road." We had barely taken a few steps outside when I heard the furious shout coming from inside the house. They had discovered our escape and Junior's condition. "They escaped! Get the shotgun!" Those words gave me a strength I didn't know I possessed. I practically carried Peter, running through the fields toward the small woods I had spotted. Behind us, I heard the door slam and heavy footsteps. "You'll pay for this!" shouted Richard, his voice loaded with hatred. "You'll pay dearly!" We reached the edge of the woods when I heard the first shot. The thunderous sound of the shotgun tore through the morning silence, making birds fly frightened from the trees. The bullet passed far, but the second shot came immediately after, hitting a tree near us, wood splinters flying. "Mom, leave me," murmured Peter, almost unconscious. "Go alone. Faster." "Never," I replied, dragging him into the dense woods. "I'll never leave you again, son. We're getting out of this together." The woods offered us some protection, making it difficult for Richard to aim. But it also made our escape slower, with branches and roots to trip over, especially carrying Peter, who was now practically unconscious. After what seemed like an eternity dragging ourselves through the vegetation, I heard the sweetest sound in the world: running water. A stream cut through the woods, and where there was water, there could be a trail, maybe a road, maybe people. We followed the watercourse, now no longer hearing the shouts or shots behind us. Had they given up? Or were they just surrounding us, taking another path? The stream led us to a small dirt road where, to my surprise and absolute relief, I saw an old milk truck parked. The driver, an elderly man with a straw hat, looked astonished when we emerged from the woods. Me dragging my semi-conscious son, both covered in dirt, blood, and leaves. "For the love of God, ma'am, what happened? Do you need help?" "Hospital," was all I could say before my legs finally gave way, dropping both of us on the dusty road. The old driver didn't ask any more questions. He helped me put Peter in the truck bed, among the milk cans, and drove as fast as that old vehicle allowed to the nearest hospital, in the small town of Monroe. The following hours were a blur of fluorescent lights, urgent medical voices, forms to fill out. Peter was immediately taken to surgery. The blow to the head had caused a subdural hematoma that urgently needed to be drained. The infection was advanced, his body temperature dangerously high. While the doctors fought to save my son, I had to face the inevitable questions from the local police. I told everything: our true identity, the story with Jack decades ago, the sudden appearance of Richard and his son, the kidnapping, our desperate escape. "Ma'am, are you saying you were held captive on a farm near here?" asked the sheriff, a middle-aged man with a skeptical expression. "And that these men are relatives of your ex-husband who died years ago?" I understood his suspicion. The story seemed absurd, the product of a disturbed mind. But the evidence was there. Our injuries, the rope marks on our wrists and ankles, Peter's critical condition. "You need to find them," I insisted. "They won't give up. They'll keep hunting us." The sheriff promised to investigate, but I could see in his eyes that he didn't fully believe me. After all, without an exact address of the farm, how would they find the location? And even if they found it, Richard and his son would probably have already fled. I spent 3 days by Peter's bedside in the ICU, sleeping in uncomfortable chairs, eating only when the nurses insisted. The doctors were not optimistic. Even having survived the surgery, the infection had spread, causing septicemia. His body, already weakened by the old sequelae, struggled with difficulty. On the night of the 3rd day, I had to leave the room briefly to speak with the sheriff, who had returned with news. Not wanting to leave Peter alone, I asked the nurse to stay with him until I returned. She agreed, saying she would take the opportunity to change the IV and check the vital signs. The sheriff was waiting for me at the reception, now with a very different expression from the previous one. "Mrs. Smith, we found the farm you described. There were signs of recent occupation, but no one there. However," he hesitated, as if choosing his words, "we found the body of a young man buried on the property. Apparently dead for a few days, with a head injury that corresponds to the description you gave of the fight in the apartment. I felt a shiver run down my spine. Junior was dead. I had killed him in that desperate escape. Even in self-defense, even to protect my son, the idea of having taken a life left me nauseated. Richard must have buried his own son before fleeing, continued the sheriff. This makes the situation even more serious. Now he has even more reason to want revenge. I had barely processed this information when a commotion in the hallway caught our attention. Shouts, running, the sound of the emergency alarm. My heart instantly froze. Something was happening in Peter's room. I ran back, followed by the sheriff. The scene I found will be etched in my mind until the day I die. Peter was convulsing on the bed, foam coming from his mouth, while the medical team desperately tried to stabilize him. The nurse who had stayed with him was collapsed in a corner with an empty syringe beside her. "What happened?" I screamed, trying to reach my son. "Step back, ma'am," ordered a doctor. "He's having a severe allergic reaction to something that was injected into the IV. We need to resuscitate him." At that moment, I saw a movement in the hallway. A man was hurriedly walking away, his back to me. Even without seeing his face, I recognized the posture, the walk. It was Richard. "It's him!" I shouted to the sheriff. "The man in the hallway! It's Richard!" The sheriff reacted immediately, running after the figure who was now also quickening his pace. I was torn between following and staying with Peter. But there was no real choice. My place was beside my son, who was fighting for his life once again. The following minutes were the longest of my existence. The medical team worked frantically, applying medications, trying to reverse whatever Richard had ordered to be injected into Peter's IV. Desperate prayers escaped my lips as I watched, helpless, that battle for my son's life. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the doctor in charge stepped away from the bed, running his hand over his exhausted face. "We managed to stabilize him, but he's very weak. The next few hours will be decisive." The nurse who was in the room, now conscious, said that a man dressed as a doctor had entered, saying he needed to check the IV. When she questioned him, she felt a prick in her arm and lost consciousness. It was obvious that Richard had planned everything, possibly observing the hospital for days, waiting for his opportunity. The sheriff returned an hour later, frustrated. He escaped. He had a car waiting at the back of the hospital. But now we have a clear description, and all exits from the town are being monitored. That night, I didn't leave Peter's side for a second. 2 police officers were assigned to guard the door of the room. But I knew it wouldn't be enough. Richard had proven to be persistent, patient, and relentless in his revenge. As long as we were alive, we wouldn't be safe. It was then that I made the most difficult decision of my life. A decision that would change everything, but that might be our only chance for survival. In the early morning hours at that hospital in Monroe, while the police officers dozed at the door and Peter breathed with difficulty connected to tubes and machines, I made the choice I never imagined I would need to make. I took a piece of paper and wrote a note for the sheriff, explaining my decision. Then, gently, I kissed my son's forehead. "Forgive me, my love. It's the only way to keep you safe." I slipped stealthily out of the room, past the sleeping police officers. In the deserted hospital corridor, I found a public phone and made a call I had carefully planned. I needed help, and there was only one person who could save us at that moment. 2 hours later, an unmarked ambulance arrived at the back of the hospital. The driver presented official documents, urgent transfer to a specialized hospital in Seattle. The police officers, sleepy and confused by the bureaucracy presented, didn't question much. After all, the patient needed care that small hospital couldn't provide. I went with Peter in the ambulance, holding his inert hand the entire journey. But we didn't go to Seattle. We headed to a private clinic in the outskirts of Portland, where no one would ever look for us. A clinic whose director owed a big favor to Mrs. Wilson, who moved heaven and earth to help us when she received my desperate phone call. "The patient doesn't officially exist," explained Dr. Martin when we arrived. "No records, no chart. For all intents and purposes, you never passed through here." That's how Michael Smith, or Peter Johnson, disappeared from the map once again. In the Monroe Hospital, the police found only my note. "We need to disappear to survive. Don't look for us. One day you'll understand." For weeks, Peter fought between life and death in that anonymous clinic. The substance that Richard injected into the IV was a highly toxic compound, which caused multiple organ failure. The doctors worked tirelessly, trying to reverse the damage, but the outlook was grim. "If he survives, he'll probably have permanent sequelae," explained Dr. Martin on a rainy afternoon as we watched Peter through the ICU glass. The brain went without adequate oxygenation for a significant time during the convulsions. I nodded, swallowing the tears. My son had spent his life overcoming sequelae from a first murder attempt. And now, decades later, he faced the same challenge again. History was repeating itself like a cruel joke of fate. During the long nights of vigil beside Peter's bed, I began to plan our next life. We could not go back to being Betty and Michael Smith. Laura and Peter Johnson were also burned. We needed new identities, a new place, a new beginning. Mrs. Wilson, our guardian angel from a distance, moved her influences once again. Through contacts she never wanted to explain to me in detail, she obtained new documents for us. Certificates, identity cards, school records, everything we needed to start over as Susan and Andrew Miller, mother and son from Oregon. "You need to go far away," she said on the phone, in one of the rare times we risked communicating. Very far. Maybe another country. But another country was out of the question. Peter, now Andrew, would need continuous medical care, and our resources were limited. We decided on the far south of the country. San Antonio, Texas, seemed remote enough, a place where no one would think to look for us. After 3 months in the clinic, Peter finally was discharged. As Mrs. Wilson had predicted, the sequelae were significant. His speech was impaired, slurred, and difficult. The right side of his body showed muscle weakness, forcing him to use a cane. His short-term memory had been affected, causing him to repeat questions or forget recent conversations. But he was alive, and as long as there was life, there would be hope for recovery. Our journey to San Antonio was long and exhausting. First by bus to Sacramento, then a flight to Dallas, and finally another bus to San Antonio. Peter slept most of the way, exhausted by the effort, and I kept constant vigil, startling at every person who entered or left, imagining Richard in every unfamiliar face. We arrived at our destination on a sweltering evening in 1994. San Antonio was an expanding city, but still maintained that frontier feel, a place under construction. Perfect for someone who wanted to get lost, start over, be just another face in the crowd. With the small savings we had, the money from the hasty sale of the apartment in Seattle, sent by Mrs. Wilson to an anonymous account, we rented a modest apartment in a simple neighborhood. 2 bedrooms, a living room kitchen, a bathroom. Small, but clean and accessible for the wheelchair that Peter needed to use on days when the weakness in his leg was more intense. "Will we be okay here, Mom?" he asked that first night as I arranged the few belongings we brought. His voice was different now, slower, each word a small triumph over the brain damage. "We will, son. We'll be okay." I didn't know if I really believed that, but I needed to believe it. For his sanity, for my own. The first months in San Antonio were about adaptation. Peter, Andrew, started an intense rehabilitation program at the public hospital. Physical therapy 3 times a week, speech therapy, occupational therapy. Progress was slow, but steady. Gradually, his speech became clearer, his right leg gained strength. Independence returned in small daily achievements. I got a job at a local elementary school, not as a teacher, but as an administrative assistant. The salary was minimal, but supplemented with the small disability pension we got for Peter, it was enough to sustain our simple life. At night, after Peter fell asleep, I allowed the fear to return. I checked each lock 2, 3 times. I verified the windows. I slept with a knife under my pillow. The shadow of Richard Nelson still loomed over us, even thousands of miles away. Would it always be like this? Would we live forever looking over our shoulder, waiting for him to emerge from the shadows to finish what he started? A year passed. Then another. Our life in San Antonio gained a peaceful routine. Peter, with superhuman effort, got a job as a designer at a small print shop. He worked part-time on days when he felt well enough. His artistic talent, fortunately, had been spared by the brain damage. In 1996, I received an anonymous letter in the mail, just a newspaper clipping from Seattle. The headline read, businessman convicted of murder of own son. The text reported that Richard Nelson had been arrested, tried, and sentenced to 25 years in prison for Junior's homicide. The body found on the farm had fingerprints proving that Richard, not I, had been the author of the crime. Apparently, the businessman kept his son in agony for days after a head injury, refusing to seek medical help, which aggravated his condition and led to death, said the report. It is believed that the crime is related to a history of family violence dating back decades. There was no return address on the letter, but I recognized the handwriting on the envelope. Mrs. Wilson, once again, taking care of us from a distance. Richard was in prison. Really in prison, with a long sentence. For the first time in so many years, I allowed myself to relax a little. Maybe, just maybe, the nightmare had really ended, but the damage was already done. Peter would never be the same again. The years of constant tension had left marks on both of us. Fear had become such a constant companion that we no longer knew how to live without it. In 1999, Peter met Rachel, a young art teacher who volunteered at the rehabilitation center. She saw beyond the scars, beyond the slurred speech and the cane. She saw the gentle, talented, and resilient man my son was. "She doesn't mind, Mom," he told me, his eyes shining in a way I hadn't seen in years. I told her everything, about the accident, about the sequelae. She said it just makes me more interesting. He didn't tell the whole truth, of course. He didn't mention our real names, nor the long escape, nor Richard. Some truths were too dangerous to share, even with someone you love. Their relationship blossomed slowly, with the caution of two people who have known enough of life to know that nothing is guaranteed. In 2001, they married in a simple ceremony in the garden of the small house they managed to buy together. It was the happiest day of my life since the birth of my son. Seeing him there, in a suit despite the Texas heat, leaning on his cane but standing on his own, saying his vows with a voice still slightly slurred but full of emotion, it was as if all the struggles, all the escapes, all the suffering had finally been worth it. "He made it, Joe," I whispered to the sky, imagining that my late husband, the real one, the good man I knew before Jack, could hear me from somewhere. Our boy made it. In 2003, my granddaughter, Emma, was born. A healthy, perfect baby, with the green eyes of the grandfather she would never know. Holding her in my arms for the first time was like closing a circle. Life, despite all attempts to destroy it, moved forward, renewed itself, found a way. Peter was a dedicated, patient, loving father. Physical limitations didn't prevent him from actively participating in raising his daughter. Even on bad days, when the pain in his leg was almost unbearable, or when memory failed, frustrating him to tears, he found strength to read a story, sing a lullaby, draw an animal to make Emma smile. In 2006, I received another anonymous letter. Richard Nelson had died in prison. Apparently, a massive heart attack with no chance of rescue. It was the definitive end of our nightmare. The last Nelson who threatened us had departed this world. I cried upon reading the news, not from joy as might be expected, but from relief, from exhaustion, from mourning for everything we had lost, for all the lives that family had destroyed, including their own. "It's over, son," I told Peter that night, showing him the letter. "It's really over." He looked at the paper for a long time, then at me, and finally at Emma, who was playing innocently on the living room rug. "No, Mom, it's not over. It will never really be over. It's part of who we are." And he was right, of course. The fear, the constant vigilance, the night terrors, all this had become so deeply ingrained in our souls that it became inseparable from our identity. Even knowing rationally that we were safe, the body and mind refused to completely abandon the old survival habits. The following years brought relative peace. Peter and Rachel had another child, Lucas, in 2008. My small family was growing, flourishing against all odds. I moved to a little house close to theirs, to be nearby, but give them space to be their own family. But as I aged, one issue began to torment me more and more. Emma and Lucas didn't know their true family history. They didn't know who they really were, where they came from. They lived under false names, identities built on necessary lies. They have the right to know, Peter, I said one afternoon in 2015, as we watched the children playing in the yard. If something happens to us, they'll be left without knowing their true roots. He sighed, running his hand through his now graying hair at the temples. The cane, companion of decades, rested against the chair. And if they know, what do they gain from it? A history of violence, of escape, of false identities. What good would that bring? The truth always finds a way, son. Better that it comes from us, with love, than discovered by chance, causing confusion and hurt. We debated the subject for months. Rachel, when finally included in the conversation, was shocked to discover the extent of what we had hidden from her. But after the initial surprise, it was she who most supported the idea of revealing everything to the children, in an age-appropriate way, of course, without the darkest details. In 2018, in a carefully planned family meeting, we told part of the story to Emma, now 15, and Lucas, 10. We talked about the need to change names to escape from bad people, about how we had traveled across America to find a safe place. We kept the most violent details for the future, when they would be more mature to understand. So, my real name isn't Emma Miller? Asked my granddaughter, her eyes wide. Your name is Emma, Peter assured. That was never a lie. It's who you are, regardless of the last name. The children absorbed the revelation with the surprising resilience of youth. For them, it was almost like an adventure story. Secret escapes, new identities, defeated villains. The reality of the trauma, the constant fear, the violence that almost destroyed our family was still incomprehensible to their young minds. And maybe that was better. In 2020, when the pandemic hit America, we faced new challenges. Peter, with his complicated medical history, was high risk. The forced isolation brought up old traumas, the feeling of confinement, of imminent danger, of invisible threat. They were difficult months, reliving ghosts we thought were tamed. It was during this period, locked at home with too much time to think, that I decided our story needed to be told. Not just for our family, but for other people who might be going through what we went through. The cycle of abuse, the desperate escape, the rebuilding of a life from the rubble. When the restrictions lessened and we could gather again, I presented the idea to Peter. He initially resisted. It's too dangerous, Mom, and painful, to dig up all this. We don't need to use real names. We can change details, but the essence, the truth of what we lived through, this can help other people find strength to get out of similar situations. After much reflection, he agreed, with one condition. Only after I'm gone. I don't want to relive all this again. I respected his wish, of course, but I started writing anyway, in secret. Pages and pages of painful memories, detailing each moment of our journey. It was like draining a poison that had run in my veins for decades. Painful, but also purifying. In January 2024, my son, my warrior, my survivor, finally found the rest he deserved. A stroke took him in his sleep, peacefully, without suffering. At 57, he departed, leaving a family that loved him, a legacy of courage and resilience, and the freedom for me to finally tell our story. And so, my dear viewers, I come to the end of this narrative that I began a few weeks ago on this channel. From Betty Smith to Laura Johnson to Susan Miller, and finally just Grandma Betty to you all, I've shared the most painful and also most important story of my life. If you're watching and recognize yourself in any part of this story, if you live in fear, if you suffer abuse, if you think there's no way out, I want you to know there is a path. It's difficult, it's scary, it often seems impossible, but it exists, and you deserve to walk it. You deserve to live without fear. You deserve to be free. Today, at 78, I look back and see a life marked by unimaginable tragedies, but also by a strength I didn't know I possessed. I see the smiling faces of my grandchildren, the life my son managed to build despite everything, and I know that somehow we won. It wasn't a clean or complete victory. We carry scars that will never fully heal. But we won. If you liked this video, please hit that like button and subscribe to Grandparents' Tales. Share with anyone who might need to hear this story, And don't forget to comment below and let me know which city you were born in. I love reading your comments and connecting with all of you wonderful people. A big hug from this grandma who learned the hardest way that while there is life, there is hope. While we breathe, we can start over. And that sometimes, from the ashes of the worst tragedies, is born the strength we didn't know we had. Until the next video.